Welcome back to my series where I cover all of the topics in the Palo Alto Networks Certified Next Generation Firewall Engineer. I am on topic 1.5, which is Configure GlobalProtect, and this one I want to do a little bit differently from the previous ones. What I would like to do today is just configure GlobalProtect. So I'm just going to walk you through a firewall which has very, very little setup, just the basics of that we've talked about actually, the network interfaces, zones, routers, that's all configured, but pretty much nothing else is configured. And then, so I'll show you that, and then we're just going to configure GlobalProtect from the ground up. And the reason I want to do GlobalProtect this way as compared to how I've been doing the other videos is that GlobalProtect has a lot of different moving pieces, and I think it'll make a lot more sense when I actually explain the details in the lesson, which I will do in my next video, once you've seen a complete GlobalProtect setup working. I also wanted to do this because I've been wanting to do this for a while. Actually, I've wanted to do this for over a year, do a GlobalProtect kind of soup to nuts configuration. I've had a lot of people ask me questions about it because I think some of the documentation can be a little bit confusing, and some of the videos that exist out there are either outdated or it seems like maybe even they're missing a few steps. So I've always kind of wanted to do my own GlobalProtect video of kind of configuring it from scratch. But really, I think this will help you, if you're studying for the next generation firewall engineer, understand all the different moving pieces. And then when I explain the specifics that are in the certification topics, those things will make a lot more sense. So without further ado, let's configure GlobalProtect. Some of you commented on my previous videos and you said that you want to see the whole screen, and I get it. Maybe you don't think my face is pretty enough. I'm just kidding. I understand that you want to see the whole screen. Actually, that makes it a little bit easier for me from an editing perspective. So I'm going to just show the whole screen once we get started, and you'll just see my face at the beginning and end. Before we get started, I want to say that I'm expecting, if you're following along with this demonstration and you want to configure your own GlobalProtect, I'm expecting you to have two things already. One of those is going to be a certificate for whatever URL you intend to access GlobalProtect on, and one, two. I gotta work on how I'm gonna. I feel like if you guys haven't seen that movie Inglourious Bastards, where he's like doesn't know how to count, whether he counts like 1, 2, 3 or 1, 2. So I'm gonna do this 1, 2. So number 2 that I expect you to have in addition to the certificate is going to be a DNS record configured, which points the URL, which should be the same URL that you have on the certificate, to the IP of your interface where you want to have GlobalProtect running, where you want to have that actual portal and gateway running. In this case, I'm going to have the portal and the gateway on the same interface. You can have them on separate interfaces. And if you don't know what any of that means, don't worry. We're going to walk through that now, and that's exactly why I wanted to walk through this. So without further ado, let's get to the firewall. Okay, so here you can see a firewall I configured in AWS. I know some of you have asked for me to show how I do these demonstration configurations, and so I will make future videos on that. But first, what I would like to do is, because I said that you have to have a certificate already, so what I would like to do is import the certificates that I have. So I will just go here to certificates, and then I'm going to import the certificate. I believe I have a full certificate chain here. And then because GlobalProtect is being hosted as a server, you're going to need to actually import the private key as well. And that private key must have a passphrase. If you don't have a passphrase, you're going to need to add that passphrase using OpenSSL on the command line. And I'll just call this GlobalProtect certificate. All right. Okay, it probably doesn't like that I use the chain. Let me just try to use the certificate here, see if that works. There we go. Okay, that worked. So just don't use the full chain, use certificate. And here you can actually see what the URL is, gp-demo.wesleycyber.me. Am I zoomed in? Yeah, I am pretty zoomed in. All right, so that's about as zoomed in as it's going to get. So I've imported that certificate. So now the next thing I'm gonna need to do is create a SSL TLS service profile. And this is if you want to host either GlobalProtect, or you can actually use this for your management interface as well. And you want it to basically present TLS as a server, the server side of TLS, which you have to use a private key. You're going to need an SSL TLS service profile. And I will select that certificate. Then I'll call this my GlobalProtect TLS profile. And we'll hit OK. And I'm fine with those defaults there. Okay. So now what I want to do while I'm still here is I'm going to actually configure some users, some local database users. I think I might need to go down here. Yes. So I'm going to configure some local database users. What this means, local database is, and we'll get into user ID and users in a later lesson. But if you're not familiar with local database, what local database is local database is it's kind of what it sounds like, but it's specific to users. So it's going to be a set of usernames and passwords that exist on the firewall itself, and it's going to be doing authentication through the firewall itself, primarily for GlobalProtect, but also for if you want to implement the captive portal. I think there's a new name for the captive portal, but if the captive portal is basically what I'm looking for. You can add this to captive portal as well, but I've primarily seen it used for GlobalProtect. I would not recommend this in production. What I would recommend is if you're configuring this in production, start off with the local user database and then integrate your identity provider, such as Microsoft Entra, etc. All right, so I'm gonna add a local user database. I'm just gonna make a simple local user, just be Wes. And I'll just put the password here. Obviously, you can put in the hash if you have the hash instead of the password. But I just have, I'll just put in a password. And it still will obviously only store the hash, if that's not obvious, because you should never store plain text passwords. And Palo Alto knows, people developing these firewalls know better than that. So I will just give a password. Okay, that is my username and password. So I've now added the local users. All right, so that is good. So now with the local users, I will have to create an authentication profile. And this is where you would add your, again, if you're going to be doing something like Entra, you would add it here. You would first create a profile for that, and then you would add the authentication profile. Here, I just want to add my GlobalProtect local database. This will be local database. Everything's fine here. And then you need to add to the allow list. This is a step a lot of people miss. You could just put I'll just put Wes here. And this is all I need to do. Again, we'll walk through all of this in a later lesson, kind of more deeply what an authentication profile is, etc. But this is how you do it when you're just doing local database, just to get started. Okay, so now let's look at the network configuration for a second before we actually start configuring the portals and gateways. So if we go to the network tab, you can see here under interfaces, we have two interfaces. They're both layer 3. One is Ethernet 1.1, and this is 10.0.29/24. That's actually tied to a public IP. So if you're not familiar with how AWS works, basically it'll give you some private IP. You'll make one of your subnets accessible to the internet, and then it'll give you a private IP for that interface, but it'll basically do NAT on its side, and it'll NAT this private IP to a public IP when you connect it to a public IP, which I've already done. And then this one is not routable to the internet. This 10.0.3.0/24 is not routable to the internet. It's internal, but there is a server that I've put in to that subnet, and then we're going to ping that server at the end of this to show that the GlobalProtect is actually working. All right, so let me show you. So I've shown you that. You can see there's the zones here, internet and internal. Nothing special about those zones. But let's go to the virtual router here. And I just made some static routes here. Everything going to the internet 0000/0. It's going to go out Ethernet 1.1, and then the next hop is that first hop in that subnet, which will be standard in AWS, and 1.2 will have no next hop because everything that it's going to within this subnet is going to be in the same subnet as that interface itself, so it doesn't need a next hop. Everything can just switch. It doesn't need to route. All right, that is the virtual router configuration. So let's first configure the portal. This is what I would recommend. First configuring the portal. So let me add the interface 1.1. You'll want to put a static IP address here. So if you're using DHCP, just make that a reserved DHCP address and then put that, make it static, which is exactly what AWS does. And then we'll call this Wesley Cyber Demo GP Portal. That's a long name, but we'll just keep the factory defaults here. I don't want to make all this confusing with the login page, etc. Authentication. So we're going to need to select that GlobalProtect TLS profile. And then for the authentication profile, it's kind of funny. You have to do client authentication, put a name, even though you're selecting an authentication profile. You can add, you can lock down by OS and all that stuff here. Again, this is just the most basic configuration. So we're just going to call this use local DB. And then here you'll notice that by default, it wants to use both user credentials and a client certificate. We're going to make this or a client certificate because right now we only want to log in with user credentials. Again, this is the very, very basic configuration. Once you configure those client certificates, then you can go in and make this and you should for good security, but one step at a time, at least in a corporate environment. All right. Certificate profile will be good because that would be used for the client authentication, so we don't need that. Now, one thing that I see missed here a lot, so we don't need this, is this. So this agent thing, it doesn't force you to do this, but you actually need to do this within agent configuration. So I see this skipped over a lot in demos and in instructions, or at least it's not very, very clear that you need to do this. And the interface doesn't force you to do it, so that's also a little bit challenging. So you don't need to configure this trusted root CA, etc., unless you're doing the client authentication, but you do need to configure this agent. And so we'll call this authentication. We'll call this Wesley Cyber GP auth. Okay, I'm going to leave all these defaults, but all right, here you see any user group. Okay, this is all fine. I think we're just going to keep everything here default. Okay, and then for the gateway, we will add the gateway here once we configure the gateway. But first, we're just going to configure the portal. So this is where we'll actually configure the gateway to get the portal to go to the gateway. So we will come back here in a minute. But let me hit OK. It's very, very important. You need an agent here. This will not work without an agent. It kind of makes sense. I mean, how is it going to know which gateway to point to, right? So if you want to actually use GlobalProtect as a VPN, you're going to need that. So, all right. But first, I just want to make sure that the portal works. So we're not going to configure the gateway. Start off by configuring the portal. Once we've shown the portal works, then we'll configure the gateway, and then we'll show the VPN working. All right, so what do we want to do next is go to policies. And you'll see here there's no policies actually. So we'll need to configure a couple of policies. But the first policy, simple thing that we want to do is just allow GP access from world. All right, so we're going to say this is from the internet. All right, source address. So I'm going to put any here. You can lock it down by like country. This is very common, US, right? So you could lock it down by United States. This actually I'll put this here, but this actually doesn't really help you as much as you might think. I released an article recently where I released some of the research that I had done by opening actually a GlobalProtect portal to the world and saw where most of the various like brute force attempts were coming from, and the vast majority were coming from the United States. And in there I linked some research that was done by a few different cyber organizations showing that threat actors are using something called operational relay boxes to basically go after VPNs from the same country that VPN's in. And over 99% of those accesses came from the US. So really this geo blocking doesn't really help that much. I will be releasing a video soon showing how I'm using something called Vesper Secure to protect that, and then that would actually be a source address that I can add here. So please check out that video once I release it, because that will give you an idea of a way that you can protect your VPN, such as GlobalProtect. And what's great about it is it not only protects it from these brute force and all this scanning and cuts down on the noise, but the other thing that happens is if there's a vulnerability either in GlobalProtect or another VPN that you might be protecting with your firewall, this can also protect from that vulnerability, because you're validating that source access before it can actually reach that VPN or other public-facing application. All right, so destination zone will also be internet. And then the destination address, I didn't add like an address object here. You can do that, but it's just going to be 0029, if I remember correctly. And so there's actually specific applications you want to allow. So you can type in GlobalProtect, PanOS GlobalProtect. It will say it will add SSL as a dependency, and then you also need to add IPsec UDP as well. So these are the specific applications you want to add. Again, when you're getting started, you can just add any and then monitor the applications. Not necessarily something that I would recommend, because these are the well-known applications anyway. All right, we'll keep application default here for security. We can do a default. Is there a default group profile? No. All right, we can just do, this is all default, right? So again, I'm showing how to do this from scratch. So we're just going to do a bunch of, we'll do no file blocking, no data filtering. We'll do default Wi-Fi analysis. All right. And it is allow. All right, so hit OK. All right, so here we go. If I hit, and then let me add a rule below this, just called like deny all. Say any. For deny rules, make sure you change URL category to any, and then make this deny. And it's at the bottom, great. All right, so because I don't want this intrazone default to really work, to be honest. As you can see, people are already accessing that VPN. So really, I don't even need a rule, but I'm just trying to show you the right way to do this. Especially if you already have a rule here, you want to make sure that you add this rule. All right, let me commit. Sometimes these VM commits are very, very fast. So we may or may not need to do movie magic on this one. Let us see. Yeah, I wonder, you can already see, that's interesting, you can already see accesses here. I wonder if I go to monitor, well, I guess I haven't configured GlobalProtect yet, anything, so I wouldn't see any, I wouldn't see anything here. So these are probably just pings or internet scanners or something like that. Okay, let's do some movie magic and make this go by faster for you. Okay, so actually it doesn't like that I haven't configured a gateway, so I was trying to configure, and I've done this before, I should have known this, but I was trying to configure the portal and just test that first, but let's do this the right way and configure the gateway as well. So what's great about this, again, I kind of wanted to show you that how many moving pieces there are. So in order to configure this gateway, the first thing that we're actually going to want to do is configure a zone and an interface. So I'm going to configure a zone called GP users. We'll make this we can make it a tunnel zone. It's going to be tied to a tunnel interface. So we'll make it a tunnel zone. And then we will configure an interface. If you remember from my lesson, tunnel interface. And then we'll add a 2 here. I don't know why people always choose 2, but 2 is common. We made the default router. Okay, it does have to be a layer 3. So I don't know why they have a tunnel zone that I can't even add to the tunnel interface. Let me just make it layer 3. and then we'll go here to the GP user zone. We're not going to add an IP. In general, I would recommend not adding an IP. We'll hit OK. All right, and this is important because this is how we're going to use tunnel mode and how we're going to basically set a zone just for the VPN users or GlobalProtect users. All right, so I'll go to gateways here. I will add the gateway. We'll call this Wesley Cyber GP Gateway. We're going to make it the same interface in this case, 1.1. This is recommended for small deployments, but if you have a larger deployment, it's better to have like a load balanced set of portals that are distributing across several different gateways. So that's what I'd recommend. Authentication will fortunately be the same. So you can add the same TLS profile. I don't think, you can't really just add the same profile that you used for the portal, but it's going to be the same settings, right? So you can add the same profile here, and then you have to add so we'll call this GP Gateway Authentication. So it's a little bit different. So it's got a different name from the portal one, but the same thing down here where it says and, you want to make this OR, otherwise it's going to require that client certificate. So make that OR, hit OK. Agent here as well, we're going to check tunnel mode, enabled IPsec. Tunnel interface, we're going to want to select that tunnel 2 that we made. We'll enable IPsec, and we won't put max users right now. All right, client settings. Very important, just as with before, you need to make sure all clients are added. So gateway, client settings. So just very similar to the portal. Make sure we're just going to allow all here. These are all things that we'll talk about when we go through the more advanced lesson, the next one. See, this is why I want to break it up into 2 lessons, because it's a lot here. Look at all this stuff. Authentication override, IP pools, but I'll explain what all this is in the next one. First, just want to show it's working, or get it to work. All right, hit OK. Now we've got client settings. Okay, I do want to add an IP pool actually. So unfortunately in this one I am going to do something. So I will add an IP pool. So if you remember, I'm in the 10s whatever IP. So here I'll do a different one. I'll do 192.168. Let's just do 667. I'm sure some of you hate me for this. We'll do 67.0/24. So that'll be my IP pool. So now the GP users will come from this set of IPs. You can actually also, so I added them here in this gateway client settings. So if you want IP pools sort of per client settings, so if you want a certain gateway IP pool for like Windows users compared to Mac users, or for specific groups of users, you can do it like this. You can also just add it for the configuration altogether. Again, this is all stuff I'll cover in the next lesson, but just so you know what this IP pool is, just to kind of clarify, is this is the IPs that your users you're gonna see as source IPs for those users. Now, in my particular environments, I haven't configured routing to route these IPs back to that interface, so I'm actually going to have to configure network address translation to get these IPs out. And let me first add this gateway to the portal. So I'm going to go to the portal. If you remember here, am I zoomed in? Oh, I did not zoom in. All right, let me put this back in the center. Then it was under agent, and then here, then you have to do external, and then here we're actually going to add the portal. So we'll call, or the gateway, I'm sorry, to the portal. So we'll call this Wesley Cyber GP Gateway. And then it was the same as before. So what was that? What was it? Demo. Come on. GP demo. gp-demo.wesleycyber.me. Let's add. So we'll just make this any highest priority. Again, we're just doing the most basic configuration here. You guys are probably like, this guy said that so many times. All right. This is fine. We're just going to keep the default app settings. Lots and lots of settings here. Okay. Now I mentioned network address translation. Network address translation is not part of the next generation firewall engineer certification. Neither is security policies. It's part of the NetSec analyst certification. But I need to do network address translation in order to make sure that everything can communicate properly. So I'm going to configure network address translation from our GP NAT. And we're going to say anything coming from this GP user zone to, yeah, we're going to have to do internal. So we'll start up, we'll have to do two policies here. So internal, we'll just do, I can't just add it. Oh yeah, I can. So it was 192.168.67.0/24. You guys hate me. Okay, this is fine. And then the translated packet will be dynamic IP import. Translated address will be an interface address. This was internal, right? So if we're going internal, we're just going to make it that 1.2 interface, and it will be this IP. That's all we got to do. So we'll call this GPNAT internal. GPNAT internet. You do not need to do this if you can set up your routing so that that 6.7 interface that I made, if that as long as that routes back to that interface properly. I just didn't set it up that way in AWS, so I have to do this NAT, and now it will just see it coming from that interface in the firewall. In my case, GP users to internet. Source address will be 192.168.67.0/24. Translated packet will be dynamic IP import. Interface address, this will be internet, and it will be this 29. Okay. By the way, one thing I've thought about doing is, so you see, I'm kind of made a commit. I've pretty much every time I've configured GP, I've had some kind of commit error like that. I've thought about trying to time myself and see how quickly I can configure all this, like take it down and restart. So if you want to see that and see like kind of a race, and we can start a competition. Maybe some of you wanna compete, and we can see who can do GP the fastest. I've thought about doing that. So let me know if that interests you in the comments as well. Okay, I've configured everything now. More than I intended to. I actually just wanted to do the portal, but it does make you add the gateway. So we are now, I will commit everything, and we will do some movie magic to skip this commit. Okay, that worked. One thing that's interesting is if you notice here, it actually gives me a good warning that GP user zone does not have enable user identification. And I'm going to need that, right? I want to be able to see those users. So I'm going to go change that zone here to enable user identification. Boom. All right. All right. I'll let that commit in the background. And I will go to my GlobalProtect portal now, which was at gp.demo.wesleycyber.me. All right, and here you can see there is a portal. So this is a good sign, right, that the portal popped up. And that's how you know it's been successfully configured. So if I do Wes and I say, hopefully this doesn't try to replace my password. Never. Okay, so what this does here is this will allow you to download the agent. I already have the agent downloaded, so I don't need to worry about that right now, but you can do that. This portal also, if you configure something called client list VPN, then this portal will actually have a list of applications, and then you can almost like proxy through your firewall to those applications, which is kind of cool. Client list VPN is not listed explicitly for the next generation firewall engineer. I do have a video on client list VPN, definitely worth checking out. It's actually one of my more popular videos, surprisingly. But check that out if you're interested more in the client list VPN. But we have this working. So let's see if we can log into the actual VPN now. So you see here, I have Another VPN listed. So let me change to this one, gp-demo.wesleycyber.me. Connect. Okay, it's not going to work yet because of the authentication, because I changed to this a different password. So let's connect here. Okay, didn't like my password. Let's try again. Come on. Probably just fat fingered the password. Okay, it looks like it's working now. Okay, now one thing that's interesting about this is even though I'm connected, I actually won't be able to access anything right now. I think, for example, if I try to go to Google right now, it probably just won't work. Yeah. And the reason is I did not configure security policies. So now that I disconnected, it's going to allow it. I did not configure security policies to allow VPN to access everything. So let's configure those, and then we will be able to finally ping that internal server, and we'll see that everything is working. So I need to go to the security policies, and then add a, let's just say GP access everywhere, and add a security policy. So this will be from those GP users. You can add the source address, right? So if you want to add that 192.168.3.67.0/24, you can add that for a little bit better security. Destination zone, internal or internet, all addresses, any applications. We'll keep application default just for security. And then I should have really created a profile group. We'll go and select these default profiles, URL filtering. All right, let's not do file blocking or data filtering. Let's do wildfire analysis. Oh, come on, wildfire analysis. Here we are. All right, and this will allow GP to access everywhere. We can actually go look. Let's monitor a little bit so we can see GlobalProtect. Right, you can see Wesley logged in, or Wes logged in. That's great from my PC. And then if we go to traffic, we should probably see some denied traffic from Wes, potentially. Okay. Can I type in GP users? Ha ha ha. Right, so here you can see deny all for anything deep GP West, but from zone GP users, source user West type, yeah. So that's why that wasn't getting anywhere. So let's commit this. We are moving quick. I know this is quick, but that's what this is supposed to be. It's just a quick and dirty, let's get GP set up. This is how long it should take you. I mean, it's been 30 minutes basically. And that's even with my incorrect configuration. So a couple things I missed. One, make sure you add that gateway to the portal. You're going to have to do that even if you're just configuring the portal. It's good to know. And then, although I guess that wouldn't have needed to do that if I was just doing clientless VPN. So I guess they have something in the back end. They're like, oh, he's not using clientless VPN, so he has to configure at least one gateway. And then the other thing is make sure that you put user ID in that zone that you have for GP. Oh, this was fast. Some of these commits are faster than the other ones. Here we go, here we go, here we go. Come on. Making you guys wait. I'm making you guys wait again. All right, configuration committed successfully. So now I should be able to access stuff. So let's close again and let us connect. I know it's kind of small down here. Come on. All right, cool. All connected. I bet now I can access Google. There we go. But more importantly, the VPN, a lot of times when you set up a VPN, it's because you want to access something internally, right? So let's pull up our PowerShell and let's see if we can't ping. See if we can find the IP here. Here we go. So it is 110.03.147. So let's see if we can't ping. All right, I guess we can't. All right. Oh, no, there we go. Yep, we can. All right, we can ping 10.03.147. I was like, that's a terrible demo. All right, nope, working just fine. And if we go look for that ping in the logs, so let's say application equals ping, but it'll pop right up. There we go. So you can see from 67.1. So it gave me that .1 address within the 67 subnet. If I go here and I add NAT, NAT source IP, you can see it's, did that source IP of the 3.191, so it gave me the source IP of that internal address. And then the destination was 147, and it was able to route back to my computer. So that is GlobalProtect. In about 30 minutes, I was able to completely set up GlobalProtect and get it working. There's a lot of moving pieces there. You guys saw certificates, you saw SSL TLS service profiles, you saw authentication, local database, authentication profiles. You saw multiple parts of the portals and the gateways, security configurations. You saw the zones. You saw how you have to enable user ID in the zones, if you remember that from the zones lesson. Lots of moving pieces. I recommend, if you haven't done this before, go configure GlobalProtect, spin up a VM series in AWS, and configure it. Just get it working. I had a boss when I first joined Palo, one of my first bosses. He said that every time he set up GlobalProtect, he said his like palms sweat. And honestly, it was like that the first couple times I had to do it too, because there can be so many moving pieces. I've had to show this to people, and they're like, "Wow, this is just a lot of pieces." But I recommend just go do it, configure it. Once you kind of understand it, then come back and watch my next video that I'll put out, and we'll walk through a lot of the details of all these configurations. But they'll make a lot more sense kind of once you see all the moving pieces and you see how all these things work together to get a VPN working. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video where I will continue to talk about GlobalProtect. Thank you.